For 1,000 years, it was the jewel of the world, the queen of cities, Constantinople, while the Western Roman Empire crumbled into dust. This city, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, stood strong. Its legendary walls had repelled every invader, from Avars to Arabs. It was a fortress, a center of immense wealth, culture, and power. Imagine a city so secure, so magnificent, that its people believed it was literally untouchable, protected by God himself. But the greatest threat to an empire isn't always the enemy at the gates. Sometimes it's the friend you let inside. Let's rewind to the beginning of the 13th century. The Byzantine Empire was still impressive, but cracks were showing. Not on its walls, but from within. A series of weak and incompetent emperors had left the treasury drained and the government in chaos. Power was a revolving door, seized through backstabbing and political schemes, not earned through leadership. The empire was sick, plagued by internal conflict and a deep sense of mistrust that poisoned everything. It was in this fragile state that a desperate decision was made, one that would seal Constantinople's fate. Enter a young, ambitious prince named Alexios Angelos. His father, the emperor, had been overthrown and blinded by his own brother. Alexios managed to escape and was now seeking help to reclaim what he believed was his birthright. He knew the Byzantine army was too fractured to help him, so he looked west to a massive army gathering in Venice. This was the Fourth Crusade. These were knights, soldiers of Christ, who had sworn an oath to sail to the Holy Land and recapture Jerusalem. But crusades were expensive. They were short on ships, short on supplies, and short on money. Alexios saw his opportunity. He approached the leaders of the crusade with a deal that sounded too good to be true. He told them, "If you divert your army to Constantinople and help me take back my throne, I will solve all your problems." He promised them a staggering amount of silver, enough to pay off all their debts to the Venetians and fund their entire campaign to Jerusalem. He promised to provide them with supplies for a full year. And most tempting of all for the Pope who had sanctioned the crusade, he promised to end the Great Schism and bring the entire Eastern Orthodox Church under the authority of Rome. It was an irresistible offer. The Crusaders, led by their greed and their own desperation, agreed. They would make a small detour to Constantinople. In 1203, the massive Crusader fleet appeared before the Golden City. For the people of Constantinople, it was a terrifying sight. But for the usurper emperor on the throne, it was even worse. He fled the city in the dead of night, and with the help of the Crusader army, young Alexios was crowned co-emperor alongside his newly freed blind father. The first part of the deal was done. The Crusaders had kept their word. Now it was time for Alexios to keep his. And that's when reality came crashing down. The promises Alexios had made were built on fantasy. The imperial treasury was nearly empty. There was no way he could pay the massive sum he had offered. He tried to raise the money by imposing new heavy taxes and even melting down sacred church icons, which horrified the deeply religious citizens. The people of Constantinople, who had never wanted these Western barbarians in their city to begin with, grew furious. They saw the Crusaders not as saviors, but as greedy mercenaries, and their new emperor as a puppet. Tensions in the city reached a boiling point. The Crusaders were camped outside the walls, growing more impatient and angry by the day. They hadn't been paid, they were running out of food, and they felt betrayed. Fights broke out between the locals and the Crusader soldiers. A fire, started during one of these brawls, raged through the city for days, destroying a huge portion of Constantinople and leaving thousands homeless. The city turned on its emperors. Alexios and his father were overthrown and killed in a palace coup. A new anti-Western emperor took the throne and immediately cut off all contact with the Crusaders. Now the Crusaders were truly stuck. They were in hostile territory, with no money, no supplies, and a city that now wanted them dead. The original mission to Jerusalem was a distant memory. All that remained was anger, resentment, and greed. The Venetian leader, a shrewd and calculating old doge named Enrico Dandolo, saw a new opportunity. Why settle for payment when you could take the source of the wealth itself? The Crusaders, feeling betrayed and morally justified, made a decision that would forever stain the history of Christendom. They would not just demand payment. They would take the city. In April of 1204, the unthinkable happened. Christian soldiers who had sworn to protect their faith turned their weapons on the largest Christian city in the world. They launched a full-scale assault on Constantinople. The city's defenders, though outnumbered and demoralized, fought bravely. But the Crusaders, driven by a lust for gold and glory, were relentless. After days of brutal fighting, they breached the legendary Theodosian walls. The city that had stood for 1,000 years was now defenseless. What followed was not a conquest, it was a massacre. For 3 days, Constantinople was subjected to an orgy of destruction and looting. The Crusaders ran wild. They slaughtered thousands of civilians, men, women, and children, in the streets and in their homes. They desecrated the city's magnificent churches, including the Hagia Sophia itself, the heart of Eastern Orthodoxy. They drank wine from sacred chalices, destroyed priceless works of art, and tore down ancient statues to melt them for coin. Libraries containing 1,000 years of knowledge were put to the torch. Centuries of accumulated wealth, culture, and history vanished in a storm of fire and greed. The city was systematically stripped bare. Relics, gold, and treasures were packed up and shipped back to Venice and other European capitals, where many of them remain to this day. The Byzantine Empire technically survived. A few successor states were established in exile, and they would eventually recapture a hollowed-out Constantinople about 60 years later. But it was never the same. The sack of 1204 was a mortal wound from which the empire would never recover. Its economy was shattered. Its population was decimated. Its authority and prestige were gone forever. The vibrant, powerful heart of the empire had been ripped out, not by a foreign enemy, but by its supposed allies. This catastrophic event left Byzantium permanently weakened, a shadow of its former self. When the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II arrived with his cannons 2.5 centuries later, he didn't find the mighty empire of old. He found a broken, depopulated city, a ghost haunted by the memory of its own betrayal. The final fall of Constantinople in 1453 was just the final act in a tragedy that had begun long before. So, why did Constantinople fall? It wasn't because its walls failed. It fell because its leadership failed. It fell because it trusted the wrong people at the worst possible time. It fell because desperation and greed replaced wisdom and caution. The story of 1204 is a brutal reminder that the greatest dangers often come disguised as help, and that empires rarely fall to the enemies they prepare for. They fall to the ones they foolishly invite inside. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating and tragic as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most dramatic turning points. See you next time.